Swimming like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank, coming to you virtually from Seattle, the whole Pacific Northwest. And today we go down Interstate 5 into the Bay Area. Listen, if you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, this right here is the podcast for you. This is where we say street smarts and book smarts collide. Hello again, everyone. I'm Dan Whedon, and I'm joined today by my co-host, the venerable Linda Popke. Linda, coming to us from the Bay Area. Great to see you again. Our guest today is Christine Rose. Christine Rose is the founder and CEO at www.ceoexcel.com, a virtual learning community for CEOs of $1 million plus revenue companies. She's a top coach working with CEOs to grow leadership, effective teams, and high-value companies across the United States and globally. An award-winning, internationally best-selling author featured in the UN Foundation's #EqualEverywhere campaign. She's a volunteer, a mom, and a grandma. Christine speaks to groups on business, success principles, psychological safety. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, cultural change, and personal growth. Christine, welcome to the show. We'll be with you in just a minute. Listen, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, YouTube. I could go on because why, Linda?
We are ubiquitous.
We are ubiquitous. We come to you from a whole bunch of cities. The mothership in Atlanta, of course. We're in Boca Raton. We're in Charleston. We're in Pennsylvania. We are all over the place. New cities popping up all the time. Now, before we bring on Christine, Linda, it's time you and I had a chat. It's been a while. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Dan. How are you?
Good. We had a situation where you swapped with Michelle, and so it seems like a long time since you've been on. You may not know, Linda, that probably since the last time I talked to you, Barb and I took our granddaughters to go see the goat. And I'm not talking like goats, like at the zoo, which they've done. I'm talking about the greatest of all time, Sue Bird, for the Seattle Storm, and they're still playing in the playoffs. We went to see her last regular season game. It was a lot of fun. We had really good seats, I thought, until my granddaughter Ellie said, "Why can't we sit down there on those seats, like by the court side?" I said, "Well, those aren't ours," but she has good taste. But I was thinking, in my opinion, Sue Bird belongs on the Mount Rushmore of Seattle pro athletes, right up there with Ken Griffey Jr. and probably Russell Wilson. She's the greatest of all time, at least in Seattle sports. And I want to get your opinion as a female entrepreneur. And we're going to probably talk a lot about this with Christine today. I would say that I could be challenged by that, I doubt women, but a lot, probably men saying, "Well, wait a minute, she plays in the WNBA. That's not the same as the NBA or other professional sports. Their season is shorter. They play in the off season in Europe and different places. It's not the same. Yes, she's great, but but. So, what's your comment on that?"
Well, first of all, we've been watching Sue Bird for a while. My daughter was very much into Stanford women's basketball, and Sue Bird used to play for Connecticut. She was a Connecticut Husky, not a Washington Husky.
Yeah, yes, I'm aware.
So we've been watching her, and she is pretty amazing. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of women athletes get that women adjective before their name, which is like, oh, they're the greatest women athlete or female basketball player. And you're right, she's absolutely amazing. And could she play in the NBA? Well, certainly the guys are bigger and taller, whatever, but she certainly could handle probably most of them with her eyes closed. And the problem we have, I think, even today, even in business, we still have this, well, the woman does this, it's the female adjective. We have to get to a point where we just say, hey, she's the best at this. She's the greatest, without knowing what their gender is. And I wish I could say in Silicon Valley we've solved that, but not yet. We're still working on it, and I think we still have a long ways to go.
Well, this is a perfect conversation to bring in our guest, Christine Rose. Christine, welcome. And I want to bring you into this conversation as a girl dad and a grandfather of 3 girls and 1 boy. I don't want to leave Lucas out, but we got 3 girls on. I'm a feminist. I'm going to say I'm all about women's equality, both in sports and in the workplace, actually everywhere. But it's slow coming. I think we've come a long way in my lifetime, but we're not there yet. Can you give me some thoughts maybe as part of this conversation and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Thanks, Dan and Linda. It's so great to be here with you both today. And yes, you're right. We're not there yet. If you ask a girl who's 4 or 5 years old to throw like a girl, what it means to throw like a girl, she'll take a ball and she'll throw it. If you wait and ask her when she's 6 years old, she'll consider that an insult. So by the time they reach 6, there's a cultural difference in how people perceive females, and the perception becomes, unfortunately, reality in far too many respects, because we're diminishing the capacity of so many by making this cultural assumption that there's less than. And it shows up everywhere. There's research in the book, Life Beyond #MeToo, which I don't know if you guys remember Jack Canfield, who did the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. Yeah. He's one of my mentors, and he said every manager and leader ought to read this book, needs to read this book, because there's a cultural underpinning that's limiting business owners, business leaders, access to the greatness in the people that are working with you, the people who you could be hiring, the people you could be promoting. And it starts in business very young. I mean, it starts like from within 2 years of the time you graduate from college. There's a pay disparity, difference. There's also hiring, like a promotion difference. And it's not all related to unpaid work. There's, the contents have been going on and on and on about why is this so, but it starts really young, Dan.
Hey, Linda, really quick. I just have a very quick follow-up question. First of all, the book will be in the show notes. It's Christine's book. Those listening on the podcast may not have seen her hold it up, but that will be in the show notes. But really quick before Linda's question, it was interesting you used the 6-year, the 6-year-old, she would take offense to that. Is there something specific that's going on that we can improve on as a culture, that somewhere between 0 and 6 we can get better?
Dan, yeah, and it happens before 0. It happens in your head before you even have any kids, right? And it's called see everyone equally, as equally valuable, equally competent, and with equal potential to do the most amazing things that they could do. Don't limit people.
So I've got a question for you, Christine, because 30 some years ago, I came to Silicon Valley and I was very often the only female in the room. And I just said, okay, fine, here I am. But, there obviously were things that I was not expected to do or not expected to be paid as well for. 30 some years later, my daughter is in Hollywood in the film business, and she's still very often the only female in the room. And the things she says to me sound very reminiscent of what I put up with. Like, I'll say something and no one pays attention, but a guy will say it and everybody goes, what a great idea. So it doesn't sound like we've made much progress over the last couple of decades. What are we doing wrong and how do we fix that?
Did you notice the common denominator wasn't the women speaking, but it was the response of the people in the room? Mm-hmm. So there's all sorts of books. I love Sally Helgeson's and Marshall Goldsmith's book, How Women Rise, in terms of helping women understand how they may be contributing. But the majority of the issue isn't their intelligence, what they're offering. The majority of the issue is, are people noticing and paying attention, or are they second-class citizens from the time they're before they're born? And does that show up in the workplace? And, you know, I think employers who don't recognize the cultural bias and don't have conversations with their teams about how do we overcome bias are contributors to the problem.
So Christine, you know, I got to, obviously you're building a career. You're building a career off of this. There have to be organizations out there who give this more than lip service, right? I think, I hope that that's an area that's growing. Talk a little bit about your work, not necessarily, not who you work with necessarily, but the types of businesses you work with, and maybe the kind of the characteristics of the leader who says, yeah, this is important, and it might be a little bit painful at times to make these changes, but we're going to do it. Can you share some thoughts on your experience?
Sure. So leaders who open up doors to conversations about equity, about equality, about culture, whether it's racial, gender, whatever it is, are leaders who understand that in order for them to get the maximum participation and engagement and value for and from the people who work with them and for them, they need to create this level of safety in the culture. And it doesn't have to be, you know, you don't have to be a construction company to be talking about workplace safety. And a lot of times people will use, you know, psychological safety is kind of a buzzword. So leaders who are recognizing that, hey, the old ways of command and control leadership really aren't getting me the results and engagement I want. What I'm getting instead of is the silent quitting, right? Maybe I want to start some different conversations. They're the ones who will bring someone in for a workshop with leaders to say, let's have conversations that aren't about what do we do after the CEO gets fired because, you know, of harassment issues. They're conversations about what do we do to create a harassment-free zone in this company, not just about harassment, but what do we do to create this culture where everyone shows up ready to play full out, everyone shows up ready to be a team, and you know, everyone shows up ready to win together, and it's not a win-lose in that kind of a culture.
So Christine, so what I see, and certainly your book talks about after Me Too, but as a result of the Me Too movement, which has just been very powerful, is more organizations are aware of things like actual harassment and assault and that, but they're focused on how do we stay legally safe versus how do we get beyond there and really optimize the talent we have. So how do you get beyond the yikes, we got to be careful about Me Too, to, hey, we've got some great talent here, we should be doing more with it?
Linda, that's really the great question. I would say if there's are leaders listening and you've done all of the due diligence, you know, you've got the signs up, you've done the trainings, you've got the training videos going, you have the self-reporting line, you stop doing non-disclosure agreements and see them as being offensive. I mean, whatever it is that, you know, people are recommending, it really is more than that. It really is, I want to have a culture where everyone who shows up is seen for the brilliance that they have to bring. Otherwise, I'm not going to hire them. They're not going to be a part of my company. If they don't have something to offer, then they won't be a part of my company. So I want to see them for everything that they're bringing. And that CEO, you know, that leadership are the ones who are saying, okay, yeah, we have done compliance, but you know, how do we get to the point where we don't have to think about compliance anymore because our culture just doesn't put up with that? There's some books out there, resources by guys doing this work. there's the good guys. And I would say, it's more than compliance, it's openness to conversations about safety again. And anything that happens, really any result you get, it comes from the actions people take based on the commitments that they make or don't make in conversations that you have or don't have. And so if you're seeing results you don't like, or if you're missing results that you want to see, maybe it's time to start having more conversations.
Well, I can't believe that time goes, so we have to have a different conversation for a second, Christine. We're going to give you a break here to catch your breath because we have to take a short break to hear from today's Spotlight sponsor. And when we come back with our guest, Christine Rose, for our Hot or Not section of the show, we're going to dive deeper into psychological safety. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Does this sound like you? I'd love to write a book, but I just don't have the time. In fact, I'm not sure to where to even start. Maybe you have a compelling story to share or valuable advice for clients and prospects. If only you could get that story out of your head and into a published format. Think you don't have time to write a book?
Barb, are you there? Okay, so everybody else can hear me, correct? Okay, so I don't know what happened to Barb. She asked if we don't, well, you do have time to write a book. Let me just tell you, you have time to write a book. And if you do and want some help, then Leverage to Market Associates and the venerable, I don't know if that's a good, I don't know. I'm going to say you're venerable, Linda. The venerable Linda Popke can help you just like she helped me. So I hope that works. My concern right now for the viewers is that we got pinned. I think people can hear us. You can hear me. I don't know if it's working on the other end. We're going to just continue to dive in forward, and I will try to reach Barb on the text. So Linda, why don't you pretend that we just came out of that break?
All right. Well, we did. Okay. And welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm Linda Popke, and our guest today is Christine Rose. And our next segment is Hot or Not.
So hot or not, and I just found out everything's okay with Barb. We had a little coughing thing going on there, and she has us unpinned now, so it's all good. Which is hot because we got to get to the hot or not section of the show. Christine, this is where we, Linda and I, pepper you with questions about a whole bunch of different things, and with your background, it could be just about anything. And then you're going to tell us whether it's hot or not and why or why not. So I mentioned I actually really want to dive into this psychological safety. It would be silly for me to say hot or not on that. You're going to tell me it's smoking hot, I'm sure. So I'm going to ask you to define psychological safety for those who may not have heard it, because I really hadn't before. I can imagine it. But I also want you to talk a little bit about when a business owner uses words like psychological safety. They may have employees who kind of roll their eyes and say, okay, it's just one of those other things. How do they get by that? How do you overcome that obstacle?
So you're right. It's totally hot, and it should be hot for the rest of the time we're breathing on the planet. Okay. And so when you don't need to use the word psychological safety when you're talking to your employees, but what it is that it is the culture of a team that allowed team members to show up, contribute, learn together, challenge the status quo without fear of negative repercussion. So they get to show up as themselves. They get to, they're not worried about what their hair looks like. Whether or not they fit somebody's stereotype. You don't have to be a stereotype person to fit. They get to learn. So they're not worried about getting fired the first time they make a big mistake, that the team comes together and learns together. They get to, really like contribute. So once they've proven their chops, you don't micromanage them. They get to run with it and they get to contribute. And, that's whether you're a female alone in a room with all men, or you're a guy who's been there, 3 months, or whoever you are. I'm going to let my people contribute because they've earned the right to do it. And that's what I'm paying them for. And then the right to challenge the status quo, and really like tip over sacred cows. When you have this kind of culture in your company, you're not going to worry about losing people because they're going to love working for you. You're not going to worry about innovation because they're going to come up with their brilliant ideas and not be afraid you're going to shut them down every time they open their mouth. And you're going to really have a place where people are going to want their friends to work. You're going to be one of those best places to work. That's just amazing. So yeah, very hot.
So I've got kind of a follow-on question to that. We hear a lot about DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And on one hand, it's like, gee, it's great that we're doing that, but shouldn't that be part of the DNA of a culture and not a program that is run by HR off to the side? So are DEI programs hot or are they not?
Oh, Linda, that's a tough one. So I'm going to say they're hot with a caveat. And that is that if they're not coming with authority, like they can't change things in the culture, if they're not fully 100% supported and lived out by the top leadership team, then they're not only a waste of money, they're actually negative, because what you're doing is paying lip service to change that needs to desperately happen in your organization.
So I'm gonna veer slightly, not slightly, probably veer quite a bit. I'm gonna move a little bit to entrepreneurship. We've talked a lot about, very important topic. Yeah, you're also an entrepreneur, and this is an entrepreneur show. So I'm gonna kind of do a hot or not on that and get your opinion, because we get some really good answers on this. So Christine, hot or not? Or maybe I should say, which one's hotter, street smarts or book smarts?
Ooh, I have to go with street smarts. That being said, I'm not for less than every kind of education that you want to pile into your head. And every winner, every top entrepreneur is a lifelong learner, and they read all the time. They are constantly devouring. They're listening to audiobooks. I mean, I'm for lifelong learning. And then I have to say, when you want to make it as an entrepreneur, you better be in with people who can help to guide you and help give you mentoring, suggestions. You got to learn somewhere. The people who really make it don't do it alone.
Hey, Linda, if you don't mind, I have a follow-up on that, because this is something we normally talk about earlier in the show, but we got so engrossed in the topic. Christine, tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, your path. How did you get from, wherever you were as a high school graduate to where you are today? Talk a little bit about that journey, your passion, as well as you're also doing some leadership coaching for CEOs. So fill us in on that.
Thanks, Dan. Well, in high school, I used to work at a formal wear store. My first job actually was as a bookkeeper at a commercial printing company in high school. And I went through college with different kind of retail jobs. I went into B2B sales when I graduated from college. And I did a lot of volunteering and stay-at-home mom time for a while. I went back into business development. And then I went into nonprofit development. And what happened was, after kind of retiring from nonprofit development, I had worked with a coach, and it was phenomenally successful for me and accelerated my growth and journey so much. I really wanted to study it and find out why this works, because coaching is so different from consulting, mentoring, therapy. It's a phenomenal relationship where you create the future you want to see, and it's relevant in business and life. It's relevant everywhere. So I studied it, and darn if people didn't find out I was coaching and recommend me to their friends, and their friends recommended me to their bosses. And the coaching and consulting practice that I started in 2015 has been working with leaders. And then most recently, I launched CEO Excel. That is an online virtual learning community for CEOs, because I'm passionate about coaching leaders to fully live and to really lead effectively and to make the maximum impact they can in the world. And those kind of leaders don't think they know everything. So they're coachable, and they want to be engaged with peers and with learning tools to keep on increasing their leadership skill, their team innovation and effectiveness, and the value of their company.
So I want to go a little bit different way, and I think I know the answer to this, but hot or not, getting a presidential award for your lifetime work and your service. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, I think that's kind of hot. I mean, it's not really like which president you get the award for, but it's nice to be recognized when you put in time. And I can tell you, I did a whole lot of unpaid work, and there's an unpaid economy of people who are volunteering. So for me, it was hot to get recognized. But what was hotter was that I never stopped developing professionally during times that I spent volunteering.
Well, tell us the award, because it'll be on their bio, but those listening or watching may not know what it is. Tell us a little more about the award.
Oh, thanks, Dan. It's called the Presidential Lifetime Achievement Award, and it's for making a difference to the country through commitment to volunteer service. And anybody who says they're too busy to volunteer, I have to challenge you. I have to say that giving back enriches you more than you ever can be enriched through earning stuff. It's an amazing way of enriching your life. And don't wait until you retire to engage. It could be that because you're constantly learning as a volunteer too.
So, it's something else we all volunteer for, not all of us, but many of us volunteer for, is parenthood and grandparenthood, and taking care of those that we, that whether they're our kids or our grandkids. And I know you're doing that as well. It was part of the bio that will be on the show notes. Talk about, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, managing life balance. And I know that there's probably better words than life balance, but it's the best one I can think of. What advice do you have for anybody listening who's struggling with balancing personal and business and career and employees and kids and all of that?
That's a great question, Dan. It can be a little bit overwhelming if you have too many commitments for the amount of time you as a human being can execute on yourself. And so a lot of people manage all of their commitments by engaging with help. So the first thing I would say is there's no balance, there's life. And there is your priorities, your commitments to accomplishing the purposes that you're here for, your commitments to attaining the goals that you set, and your commitments that you make to your relationships inside and outside of the workplace. And so if those require time, smart people always, when they say yes to something, look at their capacity and say, what am I going to let go of in order to manage this capacity and not get into overwhelm and burnout.
Well, there is something else we can't overlook. It's part of our show balance, and that's paying the bills. We're going to take a short break to hear about our corporate sponsors. And when we come back with our guest, Christine Rose, for our Plead the Fifth section of the show, we're going to go back to the future. You'll see what I mean. She'll see what I mean in just a few minutes. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank. And I'm going to do the producer spot again and tell you that Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors. Big hearty thank yous to Ideal Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, the Kitsap Sun Newspaper Group, BC Fitness Studio, and the Upstart Group. Please visit www.shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle to learn more about these terrific companies. Now, Linda, it's back to the show.
All right. Well, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm co-host Linda Popke. Our guest today is Christine Rose, and our next segment is Plead the Fifth.
Christine, we're going to turn up the heat. We're going to ask some maybe tougher questions, throw a few curveballs. You can plead the fifth, but only once. So if you plead the fifth early, look out. We could be coming full speed ahead. So I'm going to start out. You mentioned what you were doing at 18 years old, and that was very interesting. So I'm going to take you back in time and say, plead the fifth, Christine. What would you say to your 18-year-old self if you could?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say, you go, girl. I mean, you know, take off all of the restraints and just go for your life full out.
And what I got to ask back, what if that young Christine says, well, what does that mean? Tell me more. What does that mean? Just go for it.
What I would say is there may be limits that other people put on you. There may be cultural limits. There may be financial limits. There may be, you know, self-imposed limitations of your thinking. And ultimately, own 100% responsibility for your life and your future. And you respond to everything that comes at you in a way that's going to help you produce the outcomes that you want to see.
All right. So I'm going to ask you another question. You were asked to speak to a group of high school seniors, particularly, let's say, women, high school senior women. What would you tell them looking forward?
Okay. Oh my gosh. So I would say, let me think a second. I always think before I talk to people whose lives I'm going to impact. And so for them, I would say, there's still more opportunity now than the past 5 generations experienced for you to make your future really count. So look for opportunity. Don't look for problems. And get out of being online all the time and learn how to have real conversations with people. That'd be the second thing I would say to them. Your ability to succeed depends upon the community that you're a part of. Nobody succeeds alone. And so learn how to shut off the phone and shut off your cell phone for a minute and look people in the eye and have real conversations with them. Have conversations about what you care about. They're people who can help you change your future.
All right, so I'm going to put you to the test now, Christine, since you brought up conversations. Here's my next plead the fifth for you. You are at a dinner party, and there's a number of people there you don't know, and you happen to be seated at the table next to somebody new, and you haven't talked to him yet. How do you start a genuine, fun conversation with that person? How do you get the ball rolling?
Well, hopefully you would learn their name. That would be the first thing, because people's names are important to them. And then secondly, it's what do I notice about you? What do I see? I might just ask them, so tell me about what's interesting you these days. Right? So what I want to do is to connect with something that they care about. And I mean, you can go back and read Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and look at his house metaphor, but it's really about, let's not make this about me and the fact that I don't know you yet. Let's make this conversation fun while we just explore together, what do we have in common?
Linda, I think you're on mute because I see you
I was
talk.
muted.
There you
Sorry
go.
about that. Muted while I was coughing a bit
See,
here.
it's my aversion to dead air. That's a radio thing, right? It's that aversion to dead air.
All right, so Christine, so tell us, we've all, during the whole pandemic, we got into binge watching, right? What's your recent binge watch? What is your guilty pleasure when it comes to binge watching something?
Oh my gosh. So I don't binge watch. I don't watch TV much at all. I watch TV occasionally, and usually it's movies. Friends and I have been like going through Idris Elba movies lately, and it's just because there's so much great action there, and there's always like just so much drama in it. So those are fun, but I don't have a particular show that I'm addicted to. In fact, I was on Facebook and somebody sent that thing about all the shows, and I think my last thing I used to watch the whole series of was back in the 80s, maybe.
Okay, not a binge watcher.
Nope, I'm living my life instead of watching other people try to pretend to have one.
Well, see, I'm a binge watcher. We just started a new one, so on Apple. So we could talk about that one later, Linda. We'll talk offline.
Okay.
But okay, so I've got one for you here, and it really kind of involves what our first part of our conversation was. Christine, if you have a crystal ball, what does it say about the future for women's, particularly in the workforce from an equality standpoint? And I'm going to preface that by saying in my years of being in the workforce, it dates back to the 80s. I have seen a change. It's not where we need to be, but there has been a change. What's the next 30 years going to bring?
Oh, well, I think we're going to start to see I think we're going to start to see the pay gap decreasing because of companies like Syndio that are helping organizations really radically look at their pay and be transparent about it. So I think that's going to decline. During the pandemic, it didn't look so optimistic, but I think that kind of engagement by the Fortune 100 companies in leading the way is going to help there. I also think that what's coming down in the next 30 years in terms of women's advancement is there's a greater majority of women graduating from universities than there are men right now. And as we watch transitions in the workplace with boomers retiring, I think they're going to be getting more advancements than they had been in the past. I'm pretty optimistic though. I wear rose-colored glasses. I do believe that Me Too was a defining moment in the culture. And I think that everyone's still wrestling with, okay, so how do I help the culture be better? And I think the more people engage with that question, the more likely that we'll see a decline in harassment, although we haven't seen it yet. So
Linda, I can't let this go
yeah.
by. Christine said she wears rose-colored glasses and her last name's Rose. I have to wonder if that was that was intended, right, Christine?
It was, and
Okay, I
it's also true. I'm also an optimist, and I think most entrepreneurs are optimists.
I would agree.
Otherwise, they
Oh,
wouldn't have started the
complete-
business, right?
Completely agree with that. Completely agree. Go for it,
So-
Linda.
Talking about entrepreneurs, who has been most influential to you in your entrepreneurial journey? Is there somebody in particular who stands out?
I would say Bob Dunham has been the most influential to me as the founder of the Institute for Generative Leadership
Mhm.
and a mentor who has really changed my perspective and helped me be a better leadership coach. He also wrote the book, The Innovator's Way, co-wrote with Peter Denning. And The Innovator's Way was the catalyst for me recognizing Me Too as a defining moment in the culture and needing to write a book about it, like right after it happened, that could coach change. So he's been pretty influential for me, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, I know about Dunham and the Generative Leadership Institute, so that's great. That's fantastic. Well, Christine, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Shrimp Tank. For those listeners who want to get in touch with you, learn more about your company, your book, where can they go to get more information?
You can go to my website, www.ceoaccel.com or coachchristinerose.com. Those are places you can find out more about working with me and connect with me.
All right. And the book, I'm sure, is on Amazon and all those other great places too, right?
Everywhere books are sold, just ask for it. Ingram Spark carries it, and every bookseller local can get a copy for you. Just tell them I want a copy.
All right. So, and while you're doing that, make sure you check out all the replays on shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle, wherever you get your podcasts like iHeart, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, because damn, we are.
We are ubiquitous.
All right. And follow us on our show's social media pages on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
Well, Christine, thank you very much for joining us here today. It was a fascinating, fun conversation. Really enjoyed it and appreciate your time. Linda, as always, great to see you. And I'm going to see you next week again, too, because our next show, everybody, now we do this every Wednesday, live stream every Wednesday on Facebook at 12 p.m. Pacific. Whenever we have a fifth Wednesday of the month, like we do this month, we're going to come together and talk about a topic. You're not going to want to miss it. That's next week. In the meantime, please be safe, be well, and be prosperous, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond.